Welcome to the Autism Dad podcast. I'm Rob Gorski. Got a great show for you guys today. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. I really appreciate it. Today, my guest is Pamela Feliciano. She is a PhD and is the scientific director at Spark for Autism at Boston Children's Hospital. She's also an autism mom. And for those of you who don't know what Spark for Autism is the largest autism research study in the US. It's connecting individuals and families to researchers to advance understanding, improve support, and accelerate breakthroughs in autism. And today we're going to talk about Pamela's personal journey as a mom raising an autistic son. And then we're going to talk about what Spark for Autism is, how to get involved if you're interested in doing that, and then what they're doing to help the community as a whole. So thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it. And we're going to drop right into the interview. Thank you so much for everything, because there are so many technical hiccups today. And then I had to reschedule a bunch of times. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here again. Could you take a second, introduce yourself, and let's talk a little bit about like your personal experience as a mom. And then I want to dive into Spark, because it's sort of going to be the bulk of what we talk about today and how you guys help the autism community.
Sure. So my name is Pam Feliciano. I'm a scientist. I'm the scientific director of a program called Spark, sparkforautism.org. Spark is based, well, it's a national study, but I myself and most of the Spark study team is based out of Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School. Spark is funded by the Simons Foundation, and I'm trained as a geneticist, so I got my PhD in genetics many years ago. And I also have a son who's autistic. He is 20 years old now, and he was diagnosed when he was 2.5.
Did you? Well, so let me ask you this: did the work that you're doing now come before your son, or did what you experienced with your son inspire you to kind of go into this?
The latter.
Okay.
So when Dylan was born, I was just finishing my PhD. I was training in genetics, but more in the basic sciences. So I actually studied this fish called the three-spine stickleback fish to try to understand evolutionary biology. And I did a postdoctoral fellowship still in the basic sciences, not evolution, but basic developmental biology. And then when we got the autism diagnosis, I sort of stepped away from the bench for a few years because I needed to take care of Dylan. And then I eventually was able to start working on autism.
How is he doing today?
Dylan's doing really well. He's still in the school district. He has one more year in the school district before he turns 21. He graduated from high school last year. He has several internships. So he volunteers at the library because he's really good at putting books away. He works at a bagel store. He works in an office. He also works at the grocery store because he's really good at organizing and putting things back where they belong and finding things that are going to expire or have expired.
I have kids like that.
Yes. And he actually started working at the hardware store like just in the past few weeks, and I haven't even asked how that's going.
Oh,
Hopefully it's
wow.
going well. Yeah, there's a local hardware store and he's helping with inventory. So he's doing well. He still has a lot of like language challenges. He's not fluently conversational. You couldn't have a back and forth with him for very long. Like his language is going to be pretty repetitive and simple in nature, but he loves to be out in the community. There's so much that we do together. And part of it, I think, is just his personality. Like he really loves to be out and about. So, and it wasn't always this way. There were times when maybe some of the fixations or the, rigidity of a specific routine got in the way of being able to be out and about in new environments. But for some reason, he really likes to be out and about. And so we go to the gym together. He can go grocery shopping, anything in the community that like involves like going to the post office, going anywhere.
Just daily life.
Just daily life. He really enjoys being out and about. So
That's really cool.
Yeah. So he's always asking to go to certain bathrooms and because he really loves public restrooms. So he's always asking to go to certain ones.
He likes the
He likes a
hand
big
dryers.
accelerator. If you go to like Starbucks and it
Oh,
says like accelerator,
yeah.
those are a favorite.
Those are his favorite. Yeah,
Yeah.
we were talking during a previous attempt to record this, and it just sort of highlighted some of the differences that
Yeah.
people diagnosed with the same thing can experience life in different ways, right? Like my
Yes.
girlfriend's daughter is like absolutely terrified, has to have headphones on if they're in a public restroom because of the hand dryers,
Okay.
and your son gravitates to them. Like
Yes.
like they both have the same diagnosis, but they do things in profoundly different ways. My oldest used to um like the beep the alarm things at the airport, like loud sudden noises, he would just take off running because he was just scared by them. And my other son would want to find out where it was coming from, and so he would try and so it's like everybody is different, just like everybody else.
Yeah. A lot of people are trying to understand that, like different sensory perception or reactions to different sensations, auditory and like
Mhm.
tactile and like the sensitivity and like why kids can be one way or the other. I think it's complex. Some and it's not always the same. It's not like he always is gravitating towards loud noises. There are some loud noises he doesn't like. Yeah, it's a complicated thing.
That, but it's almost just sort of like people not watching, like air quotes, like normal,
Yeah.
because everybody, like we all fall under the human category, right? And like all humans have preferences to things. Like some people like loud noises, some people don't. Some people like this, some people don't like that, right?
Right.
And
Right.
we tend to sort of like focus on some of those things when people are autistic because I think it's maybe
Mm.
more pronounced, or they're more profoundly
Yep.
experience those things. So it's more
Yes.
like not exaggerated in the sense like they're dramatic or whatever, but they experience it more intensely.
Yes.
And so, yeah, so that's interesting. That's really interesting. Um, so you with everything that you've been through as a mom, that sort of inspired you to kind of shift gears a little bit, stay in the same field, but change your focus.
Yeah. I mean, I was always I would say that it would have been my dream job, like 15 years ago, if someone asked me on the day I was diagnosed, like what would you want to be doing? And I think this is where I am. And I wanted to focus on autism more than anything else. And I was so when Dylan was diagnosed, I left the bench and I was home for like 2 years. And then I got a job at this place called Nature Publishing Group, which publishes these premier scientific journals like Nature Genetics, Nature Cell Biology. And I was working at this journal called Nature Genetics. And I was very in tune to the whole community and knew about the Simons Foundation, which funds autism research, and was able to connect with them. And they eventually decided to hire me. And that's where I started working with Wendy Chung, who is the principal investigator of the Spark study. And this was 10 years ago already, or more than that. And it's evolved. Spark has been around for a long time, and 10 years almost. And
Feels like a long time.
the program has evolved, but it's really grown and very been very successful. And in terms of the numbers of people we've been able to recruit into the study, and the papers that we've been able to publish, and some of the discoveries we've been able to make from the Spark data. Because right now we have 350,000 people participating in
Wow.
Spark. And every week there are publications being published by scientists around the world studying and using Spark data, and recruiting for their own studies people from Spark. So every week there's something new coming from the cohort, and that's really gratifying to see. But so much more needs to be done too. And we need to get a better understanding of the genes and the biology that underlie autism, because by doing that we'll be able to hopefully offer treatments and supports for people who are interested in having that and wanting those things.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but so let's
Yeah.
just touch on like what is Spark? what does Spark do? Like, what do they exist for?
So, Spark for Autism is a research cohort of people with autism. And when anyone in the United States with a professional diagnosis of autism can choose to join, and you can join on many different levels. So, if you're just interested in, hopefully contributing some of your behavioral information and, hearing about the different research opportunities that um, other researchers around the world are offering Spark participants. That's one way of participating. Another way of participating is to submit a saliva sample and have your genome sequenced, and you can agree or disagree to getting results back. So, in about 9% of people with autism, we can identify a genetic variant that we think is like a major genetic contributor to your autism. And not everyone gets a result because there's so much that we need to learn about autism genetics. So we can only find a variant that we think is a primary contributor in 9%. And, hopefully in 20 years, that number will grow. And it has grown over the past 10 years a little bit. But yeah, so you can, if you choose to do that, then we will sequence your genome and we'll return results if we have them for you. And your DNA and your behavioral information gets recorded in our database, and that information is shared with researchers around the world so that other scientists can study your data and ask the questions that they're interested in. Because by creating this large database of information, we're trying to create a resource for researchers.
So, as far as, because I know one of the things that when people think about something like this, it's like privacy.
Yes.
So are they? It's not like researchers are like, okay, well, Rob Gorski submitted his sample, and this is who he is genetically. It's anonymized.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So all the personal identifying information is stripped from your data when we share it with other researchers. There And if we ever want to share your name with someone, we ask you first. So let's say a researcher at Yale wants to study everyone in Spark, and we contact everyone in Spark who has a childhood CDD diagnosis.
Mhm.
And you have marked that one of your children has that. Um, we would send you an email and say, hey, you're eligible to join this study, and this is the study title.
Oh, okay.
And do you want to participate? Click yes. And then if you do, then we would share your
Okay.
email with the doctor who, or the researcher who's doing that study, and then they're approved to contact you for that study. And that's called the research match part of Spark. And so the research match has connected more than 50,000 families with more than 200 different researchers
Oh, wow.
on all kinds of studies that we have like listed on our website. But everything from like anxiety and autism, camouflaging in females, ADHD and autism, epilepsy and autism, studying baby siblings of kids with autism so that people can try to identify things that might signal an autism diagnosis and someone more likely to get an autism diagnosis before they actually have it. So tons of different stuff.
That's really cool because that was one of the things I was going to ask you is if sometimes there's limits to our scientific knowledge currently,
Yeah.
but when you provide a sample like this, that can be compared down the road, and new things can be flagged because we learn new things and our understanding is evolving all the time. And I like the fact that you have the option to potentially connect with researchers,
Hmm.
because I know like when Gavin was diagnosed, he wasn't officially diagnosed with childhood disintegrative disorder until he
Mm,
was older, but
okay.
that's what we knew. I mean, that's what we were kind of figuring it was, and that's what the doctor was like. But he's like, we just need to make sure that we're doing this, make sure we eliminate everything we possibly can.
Yeah.
Um, we've never spoken to anybody. I've never spoken to a professional who specializes in that. Right. So my understanding of what it is from research online, from what
Yeah.
our psychiatrist has told us. And that's relatively limited because there's just not a lot of studies. And being able to speak with somebody who is specifically researching that can provide insight and answers for things, because sometimes, like for me, I just, whether we could like fix something or help him with certain things, I wanted to know what it was. Like
Yeah.
I wanted a
You
name,
wanted an
an
explanation
explanation, right? Because like
or a theory even.
or yeah, something that's just not like, there has to
Yeah.
be something more than like aliens abducted him in the middle of the night and left a clone without his personality. Like there has
Yes.
to be something that happened that connects
Right.
all of these seemingly random things that happen in a relatively short period of time in one kid. There has to be something going on.
Right.
And
There has to be a biological explanation other than aliens abducted him.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So I love the fact that you guys do that, because sometimes parents can uncover things through participating in these types of research studies that can help them to change the course of their child's life.
I couldn't look at you and say we can offer a treatment or a better outcome for your child with XYZ and autism, just because it's so rare that we have a deep enough biological understanding of what's happening that we can offer a treatment that's grounded in biology. It does happen, but it's rare. But I think by bringing people together with these rare conditions and assembling them into what in one place, what we're trying to do is keep these groups of rare people together and be able to connect them to researchers if they're interested in it, because it's too much work for a researcher to find everyone in the country with XYZ,
Yeah.
or this specific array of symptoms or concerns or issues. um Part of the issue with autism is the heterogeneity. And, we're grouping together people with one diagnosis, but they have probably 100 different diagnoses. And we just don't know what those diagnoses are because we haven't gotten the numbers of people who look similar enough to each other to group them together. And so I think what we're trying to do is really provide a resource to researchers to accelerate our knowledge, because we can't do it alone, and no one researcher can do it alone. But by providing this stable, resource of people that can be studied over a long period of time, that's when we can try to make some progress into understanding this very diverse condition.
Yeah, because I think we sort of touched on this earlier in our previous attempt to record this. A lot of times when you talk to like your doctor, they like, I've not met anyone who has actually treated a child with childhood disintegrative disorder, right? They've heard of it. Cleveland Clinic was telling us they see maybe like 5 kids in their entire practice every 5 or 6 years that might
Yeah.
have something like this. So it's
Yeah.
it's just exceedingly
It's
rare.
rare.
Um, to be able to connect with other people who have experienced something, to be able to speak to a researcher or be part of something that is sort of validating what you're experiencing. Because so many times, like, I know I felt like I was crazy or I was going crazy
Mm,
sometimes because there were so many bizarre things that would happen that if you weren't like intimately involved and going along for the whole ride, you'd think we were just making this stuff up.
hmm
And when you're
hmm
dealing with somebody who specifically focuses on what you're struggling with, that is so validating, because at least you feel less alone.
Yeah.
And then if you can connect with another family who's dealing with something, then it's like, okay, I'm not the only one. Like, it's not something I did wrong, or I didn't fail my kids, because you go through all kinds of like emotional gymnastics when your kids are diagnosed with something that's very serious. Um, and then when you can't find answers for things, it's, or what to expect. Like, is he always going to regress? Is it going to
hmm
stop at some point? And in his case, it
Yeah.
stopped. But when he was 18, he was developmentally, emotionally about 5 or 6, and since he's aged, that gap is closing up. He's doing a lot better for some reason, but I had no idea it was going to be that way. So like,
There are so many gaps in our knowledge about what we know about outcomes and what to expect, like you were saying. I think when my son was diagnosed when he was 2.5, I was just wondering, is he going to go to kindergarten? What's going to happen when he's 5, let alone, and the doctor couldn't tell me, let alone what is he going to be like when he's 20. And I think that over time, that is one of the ultimate goals of Spark, is to try and understand try to give those answers to families about what they might expect and what to look for and what kinds of signals um, that they might be, how to interpret the signals that is autism. I think that is one major gap.
Well, and we're not, so like when I started writing almost 20 years ago, I guess now, like sharing my experience and my journey and stuff, like I it's not meant to give you a roadmap for what your family is going to go through, but it's more like just sort of lighting the path along the way. And it's more like a lighthouse. I kind of see it like that. Like you don't know where you can actually like land your ship, but you know what direction to go in. And you're not just aimlessly wandering. And I
Right.
think like with what you're talking about, we don't have the ability to accurately 100% predict what your child is going to do simply because they're diagnosed with autism.
Right. And I don't think we ever will.
Right.
We're never going to have that 100% accuracy, but we could at least give you some information, hopefully, that
Yeah.
you can use to guide where you're going to go and how you're going to make decisions. And I
Yes.
think that's definitely one of the ultimate goals of Spark, is to try and understand, when a child can do this XYZ, have these skills at age 10, that means when they're 25, they're more likely to have a job or not have a job, or be independent or not be independent, and just have some kind of guidance rather than kind of
Feeling your way
like,
through the dark.
yeah.
And I think too, I think it can help provide hope,
Hmm.
because like I hear from parents all the time that they're so inspired by all of my kids, but Gavin specifically, just because, their child really struggles. And when they see that you can have a child who struggled as profoundly as he has,
Yeah.
can end up doing all of these things later in life, it's like, okay, it's not set in stone. Like our kid's future is not, it's
Right.
not pre-written, right? And what
Right.
you guys are doing or working towards doing is kind of setting up like markers along the way. Like,
Hmm.
so okay, this is a this is a so that people have like a general understanding of what things are based on what large numbers of people who experience similar things experience. So then maybe they need to work on life skills at this age or really focus on something so that they're in a better place down the road. Or maybe there's a therapy or, something that can help them to continue to build forward instead of just feeling
Right.
like there's no hope. I don't know what's going to happen because when you get your autism diagnosis for your kids, like your whole world implodes for a
Yeah.
lot of parents because they just tell you what it is and they give you a pamphlet and kind of shoo you out the door.
Hmm.
And your whole life is falling apart in that moment because you have
Right.
no idea what to do. It feels like a death sentence the way that it was diagnosed back in the day. And there was no guidance. There was no light at the end of the tunnel. And there wasn't a spark, like when Gavin was diagnosed that, was just helping people to feel seen even. Like, okay,
Hmm.
there's people out there who are working on helping us to better understand what our kids are experiencing. And if there's something we can do to help them, then let's find it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, when Dylan was 8 or 10, I don't even remember how old he was
It
at
all
this point,
slurs
but
after a
yeah, it
while.
all it all merges together. But gosh, I couldn't even go grocery shopping with him. I could not even take him to the store because he would elope, he'd run away,
Mhm.
wouldn't listen to me, and I couldn't take him because I couldn't be sure that he would be safe. And so, I would have to go with one of his teachers or a therapist, and slowly we were able to get there. But gosh, if you had told me then in 12 years he's going to work at a grocery store, it would have been really hard to believe.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's what I always tell people. I'm like, if you had told me even 5 years ago that Gavin would be where he is, I would not believe it. I just wouldn't see it as possible. But there are so many things that our kids are going to do at some point in their life as they go forward. We don't always know what they are in the moment. And like
Mhm.
where they are today does not represent where they're going to be as they get older, right? And they learn and evolve just like everybody else. Um, One of the things that I wanted to kind of touch on a little bit was with anything involving this community, it's a very delicate thing to navigate, and so I have seen vocal minority groups um, really kind of come out hard against Spark because,
Right.
if you're trying to genetically identify things, you're trying to cure it.
Right.
You're trying to eliminate them from whatever. And I wonder if you wanted to just kind of touch on that a little
Sure.
bit so that
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
think a lot of times parents hear this stuff and it freaks them out.
Yeah.
And there could
Yeah.
be something they could really benefit from if they just
Right. Right.
understand the
I mean,
facts.
I understand the fear of because a lot of people jump from, oh, they're sequencing. That means that they want to perform eugenics and be able to eliminate people with autism.
Yep.
That is definitely not what Spark is trying to do. Spark is trying to understand the underlying biology of what autism is in order to use that knowledge to help develop treatments or better supports for people who are wanting them. The fact of the matter is that everyone with autism is different, and some people need more help than others. And, there are people like my son or Gavin that they're not ever going to be completely independent one day. They're always going to need some kind of support or guardianship because they're not able to make those decisions for themselves. um and then there are people who don't need that, and they might not be needing or wanting any more support, and that's fine. And I think what we hope to do is understand autism enough from a biological sense that we can try to create supports to help them be more independent and be the best version of themselves that they want to be. Whether that's helping reduce anxiety, reduce ADHD symptoms, improve sensory perceptions, or um, help them overcome whatever challenge they're facing. Maybe it's improving sleep. It's hard to say what exactly the biologically grounded supports for autism will be in 10 or 20 years. But I hope that it's grounded in biology and what we know, because we know that autism is at least partly genetic, and we know this from twin studies. So if you look at people who are identical twins, the concordance, that means like if one twin has autism, the rate of autism in the other identical twin, it's very high. It's almost 80%. And if you look in fraternal twins, it's lower, but it's still pretty high. It's like more like 50 or 50% or something like that. And then siblings who are related genetically the same as fraternal twins have a lower rate of concordance. So this data just tells us that autism is partly, at least partly, genetic, and it's partly environmental. So, and by environmental, I mean not in the genome. And so, we know that there, by studying the genomes of people with autism, we can try to extract meaning about what is going on in the bodies of people with autism that's different than people who don't have autism. And we've made a lot of progress in the past 10 years. When we first started Spark, we probably had a list of 50-ish or so genes that we knew were related to autism. And at this point, we have several hundred genes,
Oh,
and
wow.
people are making progress in trying to understand what processes in the brain are impacted in autism. We know that there's definitely differences at the neuronal synapse, and this is where neurons talk to each other. There are a lot of genes that are important right where the neurons touch each other and talk to each other, that there are, you know, issues there. But turning the information from genes to, you know, actionable information in the clinic, there's a long road between these two things. And what we hope to do is provide a resource for researchers to have a very large database of people with autism. to try to make some progress.
And I want to just mention too that there's, the pushback on this that comes from like some people in the adult autistic community. Um, it's we're only doing this for autism, and that's not the case, right? Like there are studies, I mean, not with Spark specifically, but there are studies being done on just about every human condition, right? People
Yes.
with depression or people who get headaches or who, it's not about, I mean, some things need cured, right? Disease or
Right.
whatever. But for things like depression or ADHD or autism, it's about better understanding what's causing it, because when we better understand it, we know how to better help, right? And improve quality of life. And it's also important to remember that it's very easy for people who are uh, who need less in the way of services and supports to sometimes forget that not everybody diagnosed with the same thing is in the same place. And
Right.
there are a lot of kids and adults who can't feed themselves, who can't speak, who can't take care of themselves, who can't use the bathroom, who need 24-hour day, 7-day a week supervision for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely.
They can be very aggressive and violent. Like they're not everybody is just is happy walking the path that they're on. And if there's people out there who could benefit from knowledge, and maybe there are genetic conditions that are treatable,
Right.
that can improve somebody's quality of life. You're not stripping away who they are. You're just helping them to reach who they were meant to be, you know?
I think what I would just say is that autism is a really wide spectrum. We know this, and that, if you have concerns about Spark and what we're doing, reach out to us. We're always happy to engage and try to answer any questions that we can. We are not out there to try to eliminate or, hurt anyone. It's just about trying to understand the biology of this condition so that we can better support people and so they can be the most independent version of themselves or the best version of themselves that they can be. Um, yeah.
And I'll ask you this because you're kind of in a position to answer this, I think. And I've never asked anybody this. Do you think part of the confusion with some of this stuff, like we're talking about, where people in different places have different views or whatever, is part of the problem that we lump everything under one diagnosis? Because like at some point, maybe people who are diagnosed with autism today will learn that it's not really autism, it's this other condition,
Right.
because it's the symptoms might be similar, but the cause is different, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I mean, so I think that what would be great is if we worried less about the labels and thought more about the actual symptoms and conditions and concerns that face someone and focus on that.
Yep.
My son has autism, he has ADHD, has intellectual disability, but probably his primary issue that prevents him from being able to live like his brother who's a college freshman and, moving to London next week, is that he can't speak. I mean, he can speak. I mean, he can't speak well enough. His language is very delayed for someone who's 20. He speaks probably more like a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old. And that is his primary issue, I think, that holds him back from being able to do more. He could do more if he could converse clearly and fluently with strangers on the street or in a store, who might ask him a question. And if you could deliver an answer, like that would be helpful for
Hmm.
him. And that's his primary concern. You know, yes, he has the autism label, but what is his primary issue? It's probably language. So, I think that recognizing that it's a broad spectrum is a good thing, and that if we stand together, I think we can do more together with more people. We can, and studying a very large database, we're going to get further, and recognizing that there are obviously different groups within the autism spectrum.
And that'll be the highlight clip for this episode. Uh, you know, Humans are different from each other, but we're all still
Yes.
human, right?
Yeah.
And I was thinking about, it's very easy for people, even within our own community, to get kind of tunnel visioned and they assume that everybody else's experience with a child who's diagnosed with the same thing mirrors that of their own, and it doesn't, right?
And I think the one thing is that people will also assume the reverse, that if your experience is different than mine, then we don't have the same thing,
yes,
And so that also is an issue, even to the extent where we returned this genetic result in someone and they were like, "Oh, I have a friend, a really good friend, and her son has this genetic result and also, but I never thought that my son could have it because he's so different from my friend's son. I never even considered. She kept telling me to get testing, but I couldn't see it. And it's like you have to look beyond your own experience and know that even people with the same genetic diagnosis can have very different presentations. And it's hard because we assign so much value to a label or a specific name, and I think we need to all try to
step
like
back.
look past, yeah, step back,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
I hear that from parents all the time. I've been doing this like publicly for almost 20 years now, pushing 20 years eventually here. And you have parents that'll come at you because like, well, my kid's autistic and he's in mainstream school, just in a regular classroom. So why can't yours do the same thing? Like you're doing something wrong if, your kid isn't doing what my kid is doing, even though they have the same diagnosis. Or some kids need a certain therapy that other kids don't.
right.
And there's so much judgment within our own community
Hmm.
instead of stepping back and being curious about what their experience is. Because I think we get so focused on that title of autism that everything has to fall into what our personal experience is or what their lived experience is, that we forget and invalidate what everybody else is going through. But it's no different than just being human, right? Because we don't say that about being human,
Right,
right? We're all
right.
different.
We're all
And
different.
this is just not a subset, but it's just another way of helping to identify people who are, experiencing a certain type of human condition. And I tell parents all the time, I'm like, look, your kid got a diagnosis. That's awesome, right? Because now it's it's a it doesn't change who they are. It just helps you to identify what's going on, and the label helps you for in our country. It's how we get things covered by insurance, right? Because our
Right,
healthcare system is whatever.
right,
But we need to know what things are so that we can match it with services and resources. If we don't know what it is, then it's harder to know what direction to go in. And people get so hung up on the labels, like, I don't want my kid to have this around him his whole life. And it's like,
yeah.
but
I understand that. I understand it. I have friends who have not wanted their kids to be labeled or known as having autism or being autistic, and at different times in their lives, and I understand it. I People just don't want their kids to be discriminated against and have to face challenges that they might not otherwise face if people didn't know, because people do assign a lot of value to these
sure.
labels.
But a lot of times when we get to diagnosis, it is, and I was just having a conversation with somebody about this because it was like the wife wanted to get the diagnosis. The dad didn't want the kid to be labeled as something because he doesn't want him to be treated as different. Well, I mean, here's the thing. Like if your kid's going to be diagnosed as being autistic, odds are there's something different about them, right? And
Yeah,
you're not, the only thing that you're not doing is acknowledging it, right? And the label, I mean, kids can be jerks and tease and whatever. I mean, but they're going to do that anyways. And
yeah,
and what I
regardless of the
yeah,
label.
like when my kids were diagnosed, I didn't go around telling everybody my kids were autistic. Like that wasn't, and I never intended to do any of this stuff publicly. It was sort of, I thought it was a private journal online, and it was not. But it's context, right? So like if they have a certain behavior or they get, they have a meltdown because they're overstimulated, like it helps us to understand the mechanics of what's going on behind it, because you deal with a tantrum and a meltdown in two very different ways,
Yeah,
and if you know that bright lights are going to cause your kids distress, then that's an easy fix, right? So it helps us to identify and better meet our kids' needs. And we almost never use the word autism in my house. Even with all the stuff that I do all these years, we don't.
Do your kids know or like
Yeah,
think of themselves as having
yeah.
autism?
They know, because we started with my oldest when we had to try and explain why he behaved differently and how he reacted. And we're just like, everybody's human and everybody's brains work a little bit differently. And some brains work this way and are maybe more sensitive to things like light and sound and whatever. And we call those autistic brains. And that's okay. Right. It's
Mhm.
just Gavin's very good at some things and there's things that he's not good at, just like everybody else. And I explained, like, everybody's different. You guys have been diagnosed with autism, and they were part of like studies and stuff like that. So like they were aware of it, but it's never been, um, I mean, I always just called them by like their name, right? It's not
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it consumes our life in the sense that like I'm always working to meet needs, but it's all I know, right? So I don't have like neurotypical kids in the mix where I'm having to like find that balance. I just have three very different autistic kids who need vastly different things most of the time. But I don't have a frame of reference. So to me, it's my normal. And I just see myself as a dad raising three kids. And the challenges that we face can be overwhelming, but they're just, to me,
The
it's like
challenges
what
that you
any
have.
parent, yeah, every kid has
Right.
challenges, whether it's sensory things or not wanting to wear shirts or shoes or socks. I mean, all the sensory stuff is a nightmare. But you have parents who were overwhelmed by having to take their kids to sporting events, or you know what I mean,
Yeah.
like getting in trouble going to parties or sneaking out of school. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. It's just different. And I think the challenges with our community is that those challenges aren't necessarily recognized the same way as as parents raising neurotypical kids, because like it's like, oh well, your kid's going to act up, he's going to do this, he's going to drink in high school, like all those things that people tend to deal with at that age, they consider like normal teenage stuff, but there's not that
There's
same
no normal for
understanding.
autism
Correct.
because everybody's different.
Everything is normal is relative.
Yeah.
And for us, chaos is normal. I don't like it because I don't thrive in that, but it's normal. So I've become accustomed to that and we adapt to it. And I think we just need to understand that we can use normal, right? But normal is relative. So it's not what, normal for you is not normal for me.
Right.
It's just what we're accustomed to. It's what our life kind of, the frequency that our life sort of.
Yeah. I think one thing with Spark is that we recognize that everyone is different and everyone has their unique journey. And I think by bringing all the data together in one place, we can make heads and tails of it, much better than we could if the data was very disparate and, in 100 different places and collected 100 different ways or 1,000 different ways. And that is one of the good things about Spark is trying to bring together data from everyone across the spectrum and making sure everyone's represented and everyone's journey is represented so that we can try to understand autism, all the whole of autism. It's a big challenge because everyone is different and everyone has a different trajectory, but there are obviously kids that are similar to each other
Mhm.
too. And you're not going to know them because the chances of you having a friend who has autism exactly like your own child is pretty rare. But
I have three kids and
yeah,
none of them are
and
the
they're all
same.
different.
It's sort of like, and when you were talking about this, it just popped into my head because my ADHD brain it's really hard for me to focus on things.
Mhm.
It's exhausting. But when you're talking about that, I'm thinking of examples of like parents where they're like, well, my kid was autistic and we took milk out of his diet. Now it's like he's not
Yeah,
autistic anymore. So you just need to take milk out of your diet. And it's like, okay, good for you. But like if it was as simple as that, then maybe there was a misdiagnosis or maybe there's something going
right.
on beneath the surface medically that needed to be addressed, and removing whatever it was from their diet improved, right?
Mhm.
Good for you. But then like that sets this precedence with people thinking like, well, I used this new diet and my son's cured. And so you start all this disinformation and stuff, or misunderstandings, I think, come out.
Yeah,
And when we have a better understanding of what kids are actually going through on a biological or genetic level, we can better explain those things, right? Because there might just be metabolic things, or there might be genetic conditions that, you know, can be managed, or you can improve the quality of life by eliminating something or adding
Right.
something.
No, this is true. I mean, these are very rare conditions, but there are genetic diagnoses that, if you reduce sugar or increase cholesterol, there are very rare people in Spark that can be helped with these things. And I think by bringing it all together in one place and keeping um, the data in one place, we can make progress. And I hope that's what we can provide for families in the future. And yeah,
Yeah. Well, I think it's amazing what you guys are doing, and I think that the community needs to pay attention to this. Even forget the outside world, just our community needs to pay attention to this, because if we can better understand that there are so many different genetic variants, just like in every other human across the globe, uh, everybody's different. So everybody can experience autism in different ways. It can, impact their life in different ways, and we're trying to better understand why,
yes,
and
exactly.
to help you better understand your child or yourself. And because when we do that, we can eliminate some of this kind of the nonsense that goes out, where there's all this judgment and people just not understanding ourselves within the same
Yeah.
community. So,
I mean, it's hard. It's hard. And I like having gone through having to accept an autism diagnosis and come to terms with a lifelong disability in one's child. It's not something that you can snap your fingers and be like, okay, I'm fine. You know,
it's a
like it's all
process.
fine. It takes years. And, there are times when yeah, of course, there are a lot of times that it's challenging, but at the same time, it's also brought a whole new level and layer of complexity to my life that I'm grateful for.
Oh yeah.
And it's a complicated thing. So
We grow in ways, and we learn to experience the world ourselves in ways that we never would have grown to do or appreciated as a result of the way our kids see the world.
yes,
Because
yes,
we meet them
yes,
where they are, so we get to experience things from their perspective sometimes, and it really helps to shape. I wouldn't be who I am today. Lot less gray and white for sure, but like I would have hair probably. I just tell my
yeah,
kids, this is your fault.
yeah,
But like
ah,
I would not be the person that I am today. I wouldn't have the patience that I have. I wouldn't appreciate the little things the way that I do. I wouldn't celebrate every victory the way that I do. I wouldn't slow things down.
yes. I think that's so important to celebrate the tiny, tiniest of victories. And the thing about being a parent with autism is that you recognize them and you see them for what they are,
Mhm.
much more than you would if all your kids were typical, because you know how hard that step forward was fought. Like how much work it took to make that step forward. And you can recognize, wow, he used the WH word, in a question today. And that's the first time I've ever heard that.
Or he tried a new food today for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah. And you wouldn't necessarily like clock that or recognize that because you would just be taking it for granted.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, it's we I tend to not take things for granted. That's one of the things that I've learned from my kids. They drive me nuts. I tell them that all the time. But like they are the reason I am who I am, and they're better than me in every way. And I so appreciate what you guys are doing, and I love the fact that you're doing this and you're part of the community. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So like
Yeah.
you are driven by personal experience, and you know what, at least some families are experiencing, and that knowledge that you're gaining now, I wish I had back then, as I'm sure you did too. Like,
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
so we're
Yeah.
lighting the path for the people who are yet to come.
And our kids are too,
Yeah.
you know, by
Yeah.
contributing their data.
How can people sign up, and does it cost them anything?
No, sparkforautism.org. You can join from the comfort of your own couch. You don't have to go anywhere or do anything. There are just a couple of forms online to fill out. And if you want to contribute your DNA, you can just, say that and we'll mail you a DNA kit and you can send in your 1 milliliter of saliva.
It's painless.
Yeah, it is painless. You just have to spit, or if you can't spit, there's a sponge option where it's
Mhm.
kind of like a squeegee You just put it in your mouth and it absorbs the saliva, and then you just, squeeze the saliva into the tube. And we'll sequence your DNA and share your information, your de-identified information with researchers, and also let you know about any studies that you might be eligible for based on your profile, your age, your sex, your geographical location, all the other parts of your profile that may or may not match with whatever research is going on. And we'll let you know, and then you can say yes or no whether you want to participate in these other studies. But we've tried to make it as easy as possible, because we know that we need to get to a very large number of people with autism in order to understand at a high level. And that's really, that number of people is what's made it possible for us to discover new genes with autism. We've even started to discover genes that are actually inherited from people without autism. So, like, we've identified genes that we call moderate risk genes. So, these are genes that don't always cause autism, but they cause autism more often than they do not. And so, if you have a large enough people with them, with these variants, you can find them. And, I think that's where a lot of the discovery is going to come in the future. It's like trying to understand what variants we carry and transmit to our kids that actually are contributing to autism. I know that's actually a little scary, maybe sounds scary to some people, but that's what genetics is. It's a probability, and
Well, it's a
it's
combination
not,
of mom and dad.
yeah, yeah. And it's not deterministic, it's just a risk thing, just like a risk factor for cancer. Your mom might have BRCA1 gene or BRCA2 gene. That doesn't mean you absolutely will get cancer. It just means that your risk for cancer or certain types of cancer are going to be higher than the person next to you without it.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that there is some genetic aspect of autism that is transmitted this way, and we actually are starting to discover it. But we need a lot of people in order to make these discoveries so that we can understand the underlying biology and how this happens. But I think that there will be a lot of research, obviously, in this area going forward, and making headway and making progress in understanding the basis of what is different in our kids versus kids without autism.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'll have all the information in the show notes so that people can click on the link and go sign up if they choose to do so. I really appreciate all of your time.
Thanks.
Thank you very, very much. Real quick before I let you go, I just wanted to say thank you for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. I'll have all the information for this week's episode in the show notes below so that you guys can just click and learn more about my guest or sponsors. And you can also find me at theautismdad.com, where you'll have all of my links where you can contact me if you're interested in being a guest on a show or sponsoring an episode, or just want to provide feedback or even show ideas. I love hearing from you guys, so feel free to do that. You guys have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you next week. See ya.